The definition of debate in the Oxford Dictionary is a discussion between two or more groups expressing opposing views. The definition of diplomacy is managing relations between different countries and the skill in dealing with people in difficult situations without upsetting or offending them. From the very beginning, the image of American Indians was of a savage beast. Even as early as 1547, Juan Inés de Sepulveda writes in The Second Democrats that the Spanish have a perfect right to rule these barbarians, who in prudence, skill, virtues, and humanity are as inferior to the Spanish as children to adults, or women to men, for there exists between the two as great a difference as between apes and men. After the dehumanizing image was established about Native Americans, the colonials would not consider a debate or diplomacy with American Indians. The Indian removal policies since the time of Columbus, and for 4 centuries after, have had very little room for considering the views and welfare of the Native Americans. The Indians didn't have a single chance at either debate or diplomacy because they were looked upon as subhuman and not as equals, even by the founding fathers of American democracy. George Washington wrote in a letter in 1783 that Indians have nothing human except the shape, and that their villages should not merely be overrun but destroyed. Thomas Jefferson said that it was the United States' obligation to pursue Indians to extermination or drive them to new seats beyond our reach. What happened between whites and American Indians can only honestly be described as genocide. The definition of genocide is the deliberate killing of a whole race or group of people. The American Indians fought to protect their land from white Americans, but ultimately the United States gained Indian land through treaties, policies, and force, causing American Indian lifestyle and culture to change, and their population to be reduced to a fraction of their original numbers. Within 3 years of Columbus landing in America, policies to remove Indians in order to obtain their land were in effect. 5 million American Indians were killed, and many were sold into slavery. In the 1600s, colonists began settling in North America. The colonials wanted to gain control of North America. When the American Indians resisted, they were killed or sold into slavery at the end of wars, such as the Pocayet War from 1634 to 1638, and King Philip's War from 1675 to 1676. The Indians were deliberately given blankets that were contaminated with smallpox. Over 100,000 of the Mingo, Delaware, Shawnees, and Ohio nations died after using them. In the early 1800s, white settlers began moving into the South. This area was occupied by the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole tribes. Settlers once again saw the American Indians as an obstacle in the acquisition of land. They pressured the government to acquire Indian land. Some Indians moved west of the Mississippi River in order to avoid conflict. In an attempt to coexist with settlers, they adopted Anglo-American practices such as large-scale farming, Western-style education, and slaveholding. Unfortunately, this only made whites angry and envious. Settlers harassed American Indians by stealing their livestock, burning their towns, and cheating them off their land. Before his election as president in 1829, Andrew Jackson was already hailed as a national hero after he defeated Tecumseh and the Red Stick Creek Indians in the War of 1812. In 1827, The Cherokee created a constitution and declared themselves a sovereign nation to have some control over their land. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, which forced Indians to exchange their lands in the East for lands in the West. Although it was presented diplomatically to the American Indians as a trade of land, the president's true intentions were noted in his 1830 speech before Congress. President Jackson said, "It is a duty which this government owes to the new states to extinguish as soon as possible their Indian title to all lands which Congress themselves have included within their limits." To defend themselves from the Indian Removal Act, the Cherokee went to the Supreme Court in 1831 and won the case as a sovereign nation. But, to the Cherokee's horror, President Jackson and the state of Georgia defied the Supreme Court's decision and continued to occupy Indian lands. Under the Indian Removal Act, many Indian tribes faced a choice between standing on their land and dying fighting, or leaving their land and often facing famine, disease, and death. The Choctaw, Creeks, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Cherokee faced the same choice of harassment and war if they stayed, or famine on the way to and while settling new lands. The Cherokee were forced to leave their homes at gunpoint. They were not even allowed to pack. They lived herded into cattle pens for months before marching west. In this famous march, called the Trail of Tears, 4,000 Cherokees died. Although the Trail of Tears is widely known, many tribes had to withstand a similar march going west, where they suffered from the bitter cold, cholera, and inadequate supplies. Many died from hunger, the cold, exhaustion, and disease. By 1837, 46,000 Indians had successfully been removed, and 25 million acres were open to settlement for plantations. For the United States, the Indian removal policies were a great success. Besides removing the Indians physically from their land, they were also alienated from their culture. When the American Indians got to their lands in the West, they did not start their new life in the traditional ways of their ancestors. They began to set up a way of life more similar to that of white Americans, with churches, European-style homes, large-scale farms, and livestock. This happened to all the American Indian tribes. In the late 1800s, in the Great Plains, settlers were killing bison by the thousands. Since the American Indians living in the Great Plains were dependent on bison for almost everything, killing the bison was a way not only to starve those American Indians who needed the bison to survive, but also to destroy the Plains Indians' culture. Another policy that was destructive of the American Indian identity was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Between the 1870s and 1960s, American Indian children were taken away from their families at 5 years old and placed in boarding schools. Here, they were not allowed to speak their traditional language or practice their culture and religion, but were taught to be good Christian Americans. Many could not connect to their parents when they were finally sent home. It is estimated that there were over 12 million American Indians living in North America at the arrival of Columbus in 1492. After 400 years of systematic removal and conquest, their numbers were reduced by 95% to only 237,000. The deliberate policies of Indian removal caused genocide, an outright destruction of a culture and the extermination of a people. That is why the Indian removal policies were neither a debate nor a diplomacy. It was a genocide of Native American people and culture. Native Americans continue fighting for their land and their culture today, but it is a losing battle.
Tree is a child of the sun, a child of a seed, a child of the one. Growing in wonder, they reach for the sky. Roots deep in the ground, spied by a child.